Hi, this is Amanda Marcotte, and I'm a writer for Pandagon, RH Reality Check, and Slate's Double X.
And I am Mollie Ziegler Hemingway. I write about religion news for GetReligion.org and Christianity Today.
We're going to be talking today about general topics pertaining, I guess, to lady bits and ladies. Abortion is big in the news lately, both because of the Roe versus Wade anniversary and legislation in the House, and a really horrible story out of Philadelphia, and hopefully move on to talking about female politicians, particularly Tea Party politicians. So this news story, let's start there about the Philadelphia abortion horror story clinic. It's Dr. Kermit Gosnell was a doctor, a legally, medically licensed doctor who has been practicing in Philadelphia for something like 30 or 40 years. He was just recently, last year, stripped of his license after investigations into him selling illegal pharmaceuticals led to investigating his clinic where he was performing illegal late-term abortions, and now he's being charged with, and some of his staff, most of whom were unlicensed and not nurses, are being charged with 8 counts of murder. They're accused of killing one woman through medical neglect and killing 7 babies by delivering them and then murdering them after they're born. Is that basically all the details that we need for now?
Yeah, and I think, it's an interesting story, not the least because it might be the only good thing to have ever come out of the drug war, is that he was basically caught because of, problems with, he was a Dr. Feelgood there in the Philadelphia area and got busted for that. And when he was busted, they found, cats roaming around in the clinic, flea-ridden cats with their feces all around. And they found all these body parts stashed in places, including the employee lunch refrigerator. It just sounds horrific. But I do think it's an interesting case. I think it's probably particularly challenging for abortion rights supporters. So I was kind of curious, first off, what do you think about the murder charges?
I think that the prosecutors do what prosecutors do, and they're hitting him with the hardest charges they can, probably with the expectation that it's going to get downgraded to manslaughter. I do think he will go away for life, and I think he should. He's an old man. I don't particularly think it's a problem for abortion rights people. Like, this is, in my mind, this is the biggest problem is for Pennsylvania and Philadelphia for not regulating medical clinics full stop and inspecting them enough, because Gosnell's been complained about since prior to Roe versus Wade. So, frankly, he's just basically been an illegal abortionist when it was illegal, when it was legal, and he's sort of the classic back alley butcher that I think abortion rights supporters trotted out as legitimately as an example of what happens when abortion is illegal. He just sort of kept acting as if it was illegal.
Let's even talking about the regulation of abortion clinics. Whenever pro-lifers argue...
Or any clinics.
Whenever pro-lifers argue for regulation of abortion clinics, pro-choicers usually fight it and say this is just a backhanded attempt to make abortion illegal. And here you have, a series
I don't think the targeted abortion regulation laws that anti-choice legislators come up with would have done anything to stop this, because most of them are like, the door has to be a certain width, there has to be flowers in the front yard, little kind of nitpicky things would have done nothing to find Gosnell. The problem, he was already in violation of the law. He just wasn't caught because they don't enforce the law in Philadelphia. I don't know that more laws would have done.
Well, except that a pro-choice Republican governor was, if you read the unbelievable 281-page grand jury report that goes through why they're charging these people, who they think all was involved in helping this practice continue. They reserve most of their anger at the regulatory establishment and everything from a series of governors who just decided, out of, conviction, their own, beliefs on abortion, not to investigate clinics or not to have any follow through. I think this is probably going to be something that pro-lifers are working on this in various states to have greater regulation of some of these clinics. This has got to hurt the pro-choice effort to fight this.
If the regulations were legitimate ones, then there wouldn't be a reason for pro-choicers to push back. Pro-choicers are not against regulations that involve cleanliness, having standards, following medical procedure, treating your patients with care. Pro-choicers aren't against any of those things. In fact, the National Abortion Federation investigated Gosnell and wouldn't let him in because their regulations are aimed at those sort of things. They want the equipment to be nice. They want the patients to be treated well. They want things to be clean. Like TARP regulations, which is targeted abortion regulations. I forget what the P stands for. Those have very little to do with actual safety and care of the patients.
Well, in that
they're just there to shut down clinics by making it too expensive to run.
In that grand jury report, they were also upset with the National Abortion Federation inspector because he or she did write in their report that this was the worst clinic they'd ever seen. They cataloged all the problems. The equipment is filthy. They're reusing equipment. This is like a threat to women, blah, blah, blah. And the entire consequence of the report was that NAF decided not to, credential this clinic. They didn't report him. They didn't alert the authorities. Nobody, there were so many people who knew, including other abortion doctors who would refer their patients to him for late-term abortions. They might even complain about the conditions. Yeah. They might get patients that were clearly butchered.
They should have turned him in. And what would have happened is what had happened every time anybody from the pro-choice community ever complained about Gosnell, which is it would get ignored. Anybody complained about Gosnell. Like, he basically worked with women that are underprivileged and no one cares about them. And thus, he didn't get inspected. It has nothing to do with abortion support for choice or opposition to choice. It's just that Philadelphia just didn't give a flying crap about him.
Now, also...
sorry.
Yeah.
They should have turned him in. They should have gotten their... they should understand that anti-choicers are out to get them in every way they can, and thus you have to cross every T and dot every I, and even if nothing's going to come from it, you do the right thing. It's like Planned Parenthood, is being targeted by a right-wing sting operation that's completely ridiculous. They know that's what's going on, and so their reaction, however, was smart, which is they called the FBI, took the claims that the guy... this guy is posing as a pimp and going into their offices and trying to get them to on the record saying that they would provide medical care for prostitutes, which I don't see what the problem with that is. They know that this guy is lying, but they called the FBI and were like, this guy's got a sex trafficking ring. They know. And I think that Planned Parenthood has the right approach. As ridiculous as it is to have to take these kinds of things seriously, you just have to do it because you're going to be put through the ropes.
Planned Parenthood, the previous stings, I'm assuming who knows what's going to come out on this, but the previous stings, they had callers calling and saying they wanted to donate money to help Planned Parenthood continue to kill minority children, and the people on Planned Parenthood were like, sure, we'll take your money. And they had people saying I'm being sexually abused by an adult, and they were like, sure, we'll have your abortion. And so those were really
they were highly edited though, just like the Acorn videos.
But they I'm wondering whether Planned Parenthood realizes they've got another one of these things on their hands that is going to look bad, or whether they caught it in time, or what.
I think both. Obviously somebody who comes into your clinic is like, I'm a sex trafficker running 12-year-olds through Arizona. You're not going to just be like, okay. But,
there are how many Planned Parenthood clinics they could have hit, how many, and sometimes, there might be some really savvy people working at some clinics and some really unsavvy people working at other clinics.
It's not about savviness. It's I think it's the problem with the Acorn situation was obviously these people that are doing this are lying and they're being silly. And a lot of
some people picked up on that, and some
silly
people
to you
didn't. But
you don't react by taking it very seriously. You just sort of what, you're a fool. And I do think that has happened in the past to Planned Parenthood, but they've obviously trained their people no matter how silly these people are being, take them very seriously because they're going to edit it. They're going to try and make you look bad.
But the one other thing I was going to ask back to the Gosnell thing is it seemed like early on you thought that maybe there should be no murder charges for for 7.
No. I think they should hit him with everything they can. I just don't know that he's going to get anything more than manslaughter.
Okay. I just think that's
usually how it goes.
That's also, I mean, this is, there's an overarching thing happening at the same time of this, which is people debating abortion and what they think about it. And this has to be just a huge blow to the abortion rights community. I mean, if these kids...
I don't see why. I mean, it has nothing to do with the legal or the moral rightness of abortion because it has everything to do with the law. Would banning abortion have stopped Hermit Gosnell? Answer, no. Like, he was doing it before it was legal. He was doing illegal abortions. I don't really see how banning abortion, which is what is on the table here, would have done anything to him.
I'm just seeing more people thinking about abortion. I mean, politics is one thing, and then people's views on abortion, are sort of a related but
I
separate
agree
thing.
that people should have their own opinions about abortion. I don't,
What I'm saying, the abortion rights community has really, strongly advocated for the legality of abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy. These were kids
That's not true. That is false.
Well,
most,
am I wrong that the abortion rights community fights
support to viability. They support Roe, basically, to viability by choice. After that, only under medical and health necessity. Most pro-choicers I know believe that post 24 weeks restrictions are fine.
Right.
Somebody like Dr. Tiller went out of his way to make sure that anybody he was doing a post-viability abortion for needed it.
Need can include, like, the kid has Down syndrome or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that depends on the person. Like, I don't necessarily feel like somebody should be forced to mother a child that they don't feel capable of mothering.
Meaning,
I don't know if I could do it, but then again, I don't want to have babies at all, so.
Well, what I'm saying, though, is, like, there's an argument, and a lot of people would argue that it's perfectly fine to have a late-term abortion if you, fulfill whatever these criteria are. So the big problem with Gosnell was that sometimes these kids were, living, breathing for 20 minutes on their own before he snipped their spinal cords. But if he'd done that in utero, that would be fine.
No. I mean, he was doing post 24-week abortions. Like, it wouldn't have been fine. They were illegal. Like, regardless of his methods or him letting them breathe, it was illegal. Like,
but if you were in a different state where it was legal, then it would be fine. Like in Pennsylvania, you're not supposed to.
It depends. It depends on, like, what we're talking about here. Like, the providers of late-term abortions, like, it's incredibly complicated. Like, it goes on a case-by-case basis. Very few or any, like, providers that I know of would be like, yeah, you're 38 weeks and you've discovered your baby has Down syndrome. They're not going to do that. Like, a lot of, the later in the pregnancy, the, like, less likely an abortion is. And
significantly,
there's been a lot of emphasis on trying to do prenatal testing earlier and earlier so that if you do need an abortion because the baby's got some horrible fetal, abnormality, or you are going to die if you continue to be pregnant or have a horrible stroke or something, they can abort earlier. But, there are cases, and that's just what medicine's like. There are close call cases. There are things that, you discover at 30 weeks that the baby's got Tay-Sachs disease, and, like, what are you going to do? I suppose you could deliver it and let it breathe and then just watch it die. I don't know that would be necessarily something that's humane or kind to anybody involved in the situation. Down syndrome is obviously the thing that anti-choicers would prefer to, like, hang on to because people with Downs often get along just fine. But, most Downs syndrome abortions are done way, way earlier in the pregnancy because they can do an amniocentesis.
Well, and the New York Times reported a couple of years ago that 90% of all children with Downs are aborted. 90%, which is just amazing. We have
children with Downs require a lot of work, and
I
don't feel like anybody should be forced to have a child with Downs if they don't feel up to it. I don't know who that benefits.
We have good friends who have a child with Downs, and I think that they would argue that there's a lot of misinformation about how much work is involved. Not that there's not a lot of work involved, but of course the pro-life position is that abortion is the unjustified taking of a human life. So all these other issues, like it might be hard to have this child, or it might be hard to raise this child.
Exactly, and I think it's intellectually dishonest to hang on to Downs when you're just against abortion.
Yeah, but it is. It is kind of surprising, right? 90% of children with Downs are aborted. That's fascinating to me.
Most people do not set out when they try to get pregnant thinking they're going to have a child that's got mental health issues. And so, I can imagine that that's something that when it happens, you just don't want to do it. I don't really, I'm not surprised. It's not something, it's not like somebody wants a child that has Down syndrome. When they find out the child does, then they maybe make that decision, but I don't think anyone said so.
Right. I think we're talking about just completely different approaches to parenting and what it means to be a parent, and what's appropriate and what's inappropriate when you're faced with a challenge. Probably a lot of parents don't want to have children that have any number of problems, and once they're born, we say, well, just because you don't want this child that has problems doesn't mean that you get to terminate his life.
Once they're born, but I feel like somebody's moral value once they're a conscious person is completely different than when they're not a person with a brain and feelings and relationships and can suffer, or I feel like there's a huge moral distinction between a child and a fetus, especially. Well, I feel like a fetus gains value as they become more baby-like, but I don't think that.
But in the case of Gosnell, these children were fetuses moments before, and they would have been able.
Yeah, which is why it's illegal.
In many states.
Why it is illegal to deliver a baby and kill it, and why it is illegal to have a post-viability abortion. I'm sorry, the sun is, there we go. No, that's not going to work. Sorry. Just having lighting issues. I know you can't see. There we go.
I have
Okay, cool. Fixed it.
Great.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I don't disagree that that's my point. I think that there's a huge difference between something that's developed a brain and something that hasn't. A functioning brain, and a baby that can be born. A lot of the time nowadays, if a woman, for instance, develops preeclampsia, if she's 20 weeks, they're just going to have an abortion so she doesn't die. But if she's 25, 26 weeks, they'll induce labor and they'll bring the baby into this world, because there's a huge difference between a 20-week fetus and a 25-week fetus. And I think that's a fine distinction, and I don't think many people quarrel with it, and that's the law. I don't think Gosnell fell outside of the law, and he's going to go to jail for it.
What did you think about the coverage, the media coverage of Gosnell?
I think it's lurid. And I think my biggest concern is that as horrible as the baby murdering was, there's been not enough attention paid to the way he tortured women that came to him. And I don't think there's been enough attention paid to the way that the women that came to him were in really dire situations, often due to poverty, oppression, situations like that. For instance, I've seen almost no coverage of the fact that he was taking pictures of women's genitals while they were under, and was paying special attention to those who had female genital mutilation, and was showing those pictures around. And he just seemed like a really weird sociopathic character.
Yeah.
I think people would understand the situation better if they knew how he treated the women.
Yeah,
that came to him.
There were a few stories on it. I read a few stories. The New York Times' second story on it was actually pretty good. The AP and the Philly Inquirer had good stories. But I'm just surprised there hasn't been more coverage, because it seems like such a good opportunity to talk about larger issues And I'm wondering if it isn't just exactly what they also said in the grand jury report, which is nobody cares about these people because they're poor, dark-skinned immigrant, et cetera, and nobody cares. Like if this were a high-end clinic somewhere, well, probably wouldn't have happened, but also people would have more interest. And it's just a sad statement on how little people care.
But such a thing isn't going to happen to people of means and privilege, whether abortion's legal or not.
Right.
It just doesn't. And I mean,
no, I just mean like if a blonde girl goes missing, you get 24/7 coverage, like around the clock, every outlet, that kind of thing. And when something bad happens to women who are not, blonde college co-eds or whatever, it's like hard to get any coverage of it.
Which is kind of why I was surprised when, not to change the subject, but I'm interested in what you think about this. I was sort of surprised at the amount of media attention the Carlina White situation got. Do you know who that is? The girl who found her biological mother after 23 years?
Yes.
After she was kidnapped?
That was, solving your own kidnapping mystery is an amazing story, though. I mean, that's the kind of thing you wouldn't...
And the way she did it.
Yeah. I really am still curious how she knew, how she knew she did not belong. I guess the lack of a birth certificate would be a big...
Yeah, but she suspected.
Yeah.
She suspected her mother was nutty.
Yeah.
I mean, you live with the woman for your entire life, and I guess you just figure that one out.
Well, I did think actually the coverage on that was really good. I liked how people explored why some women take other women's children, and what it's an indication of in their own lives and what they're trying to do. It was just it's just a fascinating story. But
yeah, well, I agree with you that we could have used the Gosnell situation to talk more in depth about the realities of abortion. Because I've read a number of the stories of women that went to him, and it does seem to me that a lot of them were trying to get late-term abortions on demand. And nobody is talking about why that happens. What causes a woman to be 6 months pregnant and then I guess suddenly, but it's very rarely suddenly, decides that she's going to get an abortion. There's almost been no discussion about why that happens and what we could do to prevent that from happening. And I think in a couple of situations, one woman who says that she went to Gosnell and was tied down and forced to have the abortion. She went to Planned Parenthood earlier, and I think she was 20-something weeks. She was 24 weeks or something. And she walked up. There were protesters, and they scared her off. And she went to Gosnell, who charged her $400 for a procedure that, if it was done by a true professional, like somebody like Dr. Tiller, would have literally been $10,000. But I don't think that if she'd gone to Planned Parenthood that she would have ended up getting that abortion. I think she basically, I don't want to read somebody's mind, but the way she described her experiences, I feel like she was trying to run down the clock so somebody would tell her no. And because she was probably getting some kind of pressure at home to have an abortion. Well, and if she'd gone to Planned Parenthood, they would have probably taken one look at her and been no.
Yeah, there was this other story of a woman whose grandmother wanted her to get an abortion. She did not, so she figured she would just tell the doctor when she got there that she didn't want it. And he said, "I don't have time for this shit," and strapped her down and made her go through with it. And then he almost killed her, and she's severely disabled now. She was on, CNN telling her story or whatnot. So that also would kind of correlate with that, someone trying to avoid this and having pressure at home or whatnot, which is, of course, also a big issue that a lot of women deal with, that when you have friends who've gone through this or whatnot. It's a very complicated issue with lots of things. But maybe we should move on to something else. I'm actually just really quickly wanted to talk about the media coverage of the March for Life, which I also thought was curiously lacking. It's the 38th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. For the 38th year in a row, pro-lifers gather on the Mall. This receives almost no coverage, which is surprising because it is an annual event that brings out, many tens of thousands of people, and the New York Times didn't run a single story on it. They had an online photo essay showing, which was actually quite good, but nothing in the print edition for the second year in a row. And, you have people coming from all sorts of different states for this march, and it's very rare that you get any coverage. Even with like the thousands of people coming from Missouri, I don't think the St. Louis Post-Dispatch did anything particular on it or whatnot. Are you happy to see that lack of coverage as an abortion rights supporter, or what do you think about it?
No, I wish that it was covered, because I do think that it's the most important issue is like how many representatives come out and speak to this crowd. And I really, really wish that got more coverage. But I do understand from a journalist point of view why you wouldn't cover it, because it's like same story every year. What's new? Like the word news, like alone, I'm with you. I wish they cover it, but I think that unfortunately abortion is treated like a third-tier issue in the mainstream media, and unless you can create a hook, it's really hard to get coverage of it.
That's an excellent one. I think the March for Life, which I've been to many years, although I did not make it this year, it is one of the most bizarrely organized marches ever. First of all, it's annual. And that's no way to generate news coverage. Like most marches for an issue, they will meet every 5 or 10 years. If it's a long-standing issue.
Or they're trying to target the Supreme Court or something.
Right. They will meet on a weekend, which is much better than a middle of a weekday when most people can't take off of work. They will meet, most marches take place from May to September, also wise for weather reasons. Whereas this one always takes place on the weekday closest to the anniversary when Roe v. Wade was decided. I mean, it's bizarre. It's like a really bizarre way to organize a march, and yet it's also still highly attended and whatnot. And yeah, the number of representatives that come out is really surprising. The various groups. I thought Michelle Borstein with the Washington Post did a good job of making it fresh. She pointed out how social media has been used more by the March for Life people this year than in years past. She looked at changes in how many youth are participating. That's obviously one of the big stories. Last year, Time wrote a hilarious piece about how there are no young people at the march, which, if anyone's been, is like a laughable. It's literally the most bizarre thing you could say, because Catholic schools actually bus people in. So it's just like Kids Central, high school students, college students. You see all their signs and whatnot. And the Post, I thought, did a good job of getting that. It's highly young people. There are a lot of Catholics. They got that angle. Social media has become much more important. So, it can be done. You can find fresh angles on an annual event. State of the Union happens every year, and somehow we get fresh angles on that. So it's possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, the State of the Union's got different content every year, though. I mean, the March for Life is basically the same thing over and over. And I'm not criticizing that. It is what it is. And I do think the young people angle was kind of covered heavily last year, and I think that maybe that's not a news story anymore. And, I think like the surprise, there's only so much surprise that you can really express that a bunch of high school kids and maybe some college kids come to something like this, because I mean, these sorts of things are organized through churches, and what do churches have? Youth groups. I mean, I don't really see what's startling beyond that.
Well, I mean, it's just a good representation. I mean, as you know, I'm sure public opinion is moving more in the direction of more people self-identify as pro-life now than pro-choice. That's happened 2 years ago, that change happened. Young people are overwhelmingly more likely to, call themselves pro-life than older generations. So that is something, it's an important part of the debate. And, I don't know if the media has really figured out what's going on there.
Well, so I have a question for you about that. Do you really think that polling data that's asked if people think they identify as pro-life or not is meaningful in any way? I mean,
do you mean relative to the abortion rate or something like that, or what?
Well, meaningful because it's such a vague thing to ask somebody. Are you pro-life? That's if they ask questions that were like, do you support banning abortion? I think that would, because a lot of people identify as pro-life, but then when you press them on the question of So does that mean you want to ban abortion? They don't want to ban abortion.
Well,
they start to backpedal and try to create some regulatory system in their mind that would somehow allow the good ones and disallow the bad ones, or whatever they think that is.
It's still interesting to look at how public opinion has shifted over the last 35 years or whatnot, where you went from having even conservative Baptists who would say they were pro-choice to now, people who aren't religious or whatnot, self-identifying as pro-life. There is a shift in sort of hearts and minds approach to abortion. I think it probably is important, whether it, who knows on the other side, but when we're talking about even what we were going to talk about with the H.R. 3, which would ban federal funding of abortion in all federally funded programs, as opposed to the Hyde Amendment, which just covers Medicaid, or the Obama executive order.
No, the Hyde Amendment covers any federal funding.
No, actually, it's an appropriations rider, and I think it only covers Medicaid.
No, it covers Medicaid, veterans. It covers anybody that federal employees, anybody that their insurance is covered by the government, which is something like 45% of Americans now.
But when it comes to passing something like H.R. 3, if public opinion, and you have all these people, I think it's close to 200 representatives who have already co-signed on this, and if public opinion is so strong in favor of, broadly general life issues, I think it does matter if a majority of people are self-identifying as pro-life. And obviously you saw in the last elections that, Democrats who had claimed they were pro-life but didn't pony up the goods in the minds of their voters, they were ousted. I mean, it is something that's very important for people to pay attention to, I think, if you, want to be politically successful or whatnot. But anyway, maybe we should...
Well, my opinion on the topic is functionally that the anti-choice community has successfully gotten the subject away from talking about actually banning abortion and more into these soft, touchy-feely terms about life and, it's a child, not a choice, and all these other things. And I don't think that a lot of people that say they're pro-life have actually gone through the mental steps of thinking, okay, does that mean that I want to throw women in jail for having abortions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably, euphemisms govern this entire debate. I mean, we talk about terminating a pregnancy rather than taking a life. Yes, abortion stops a beating heart, but that becomes a cliche of the pro-life movement rather than a way that we talk about what actually happens in abortion. Even abortion can be kind of a euphemism for what's going on there. Euphemisms are the name of the game when it comes to this debate. But I actually think that the fact is that the vast majority of people are neither people who think that abortion should be completely illegal nor available without any restrictions. That means that the battles are, of course, going to be on these issues. And pro-lifers have done very, very well. And I'm sure that the pro-choice community is very worried about all the gains that pro-lifers made in state houses throughout the country. I mean, they've been making gains by, finding ways to, have little legislative accomplishments in each state. And that's gone over really well for them. Yeah. So, of course, they're going to...
Yeah. In the pro-choice community, we call it people are pro-life with the exceptions of rape, incest, and me. And by creating a regulatory structure that's ever more complicated, ever more nitpicky, they're it's basically chipping away at women's access to abortion under the and the voters are okay with it because I think most people think that they will fall under the exception should they need abortion services. A lot of them are wrong. We all think that we're going to be the exception to the rule.
I mean, the pro-life community, the pro-life community opposes abortion because they believe it's the unjustified taking of a human life. It's not something that's about...
the unjustified, and they would think that when it's them, it's justified because you don't know me, you don't know my situation. I just sort of extend that to everybody. That is obviously how pro-choicers look at it. But for pro-lifers, it's about a culture of life, about a belief that it's never right to take the life of an unborn child.
that, this is something that should not certainly be funded by federal taxpayer dollars or whatnot. This is not, it's obviously, you can look around and see that many pro-lifers view it as a difficult issue, but one that doesn't change the underlying belief, which is that it's the unjustified taking of a human life. That's what motivates the movement, and it's obviously a difference of opinion with what pro-choicers think is the ultimate value guiding how they approach the debate, but that's their perspective.
So there was this article in Mother Jones this morning by Nick Bachman, and I thought it was really interesting because the reporter, obviously journalists are going through HR 3 to find out what's in it. And one of the things that was really interesting is that Representative Chris Smith, who of course is enemy number one on the Hill for pro-choicers, he is trying to use this bill to redefine what rape is. That was really, really alarming to me. He the bill is under the Hyde Amendment, you can only get an abortion with federal funding through Medicaid or veteran services or whatever if it's a medical necessity or you've been raped or it's incest. He wants to make sure that incest abortions are legal unless you're under 18, and all rapes are all rape-induced, rape exceptions. He wants to narrow that down so that it's only rape if you were physically forced. Non-consent is not good enough. Sneaking up on a 14-year-old while she's sleeping and raping her is not going to be considered rape anymore under this bill. And it was really aggravating to me because there are so few Medicaid-funded abortions already. There's only something 80 a year, if that. He's basically there's no point to this. The only point to this is to simply just set precedent that's going to make it even more difficult for somebody who's been a rape victim to say, I was raped. It's this very 19th century definition of rape.
I read the language of the bill, and I don't know what you're talking about. I saw that it had exceptions for rape.
Well, I've got the article in it,
but
this is what Bowman says, not Bachman, Bowman. With this legislation, Republicans propose that the rape exemption be limited to forcible rape. And forcible rape is considered different under the law than non-forcible rape, which are most rapes.
I honestly don't even understand. I'm sorry that I don't understand this, but what's the difference? To me, all rape is, by definition, force. Or are we talking about statutory rape?
Statutory rape, but also any kind of rape where somebody wasn't forced with a weapon or held down.
Huh.
So, any kind of attacking somebody who is saying no, but not physically resisting wouldn't count anymore. And the thing is, I don't think this is actually going to make any difference in terms of who gets funding or not, because there's so few Medicaid funded abortions for rape anyway. Most women who are raped don't even try. But I'm just sort of alarmed at how much thought and trouble went into writing this bill that's going to go nowhere, and how just horribly retrograde and cruel it really is, just with this sort of nonsense. Anyway.
Well, most people, there are various surveys out there, but most people don't believe that federal taxpayers should fund abortions.
Yeah,
not just for matters of conscience, but because they believe it's bad policy. You get more of what you fund or subsidize. People don't want to subsidize these things. Most publicly funded abortion happens at the state level, obviously, and there's also $350 billion of federal funds that go to Planned Parenthood that obviously help them, help subsidize them, even though that doesn't go directly to their abortion side of the business. But
yeah, it goes to the preventing abortion side of the business, the contraception side of the business. Or it's not a business, by the way. It's a nonprofit. They don't make profits.
Huh. They, yeah. But they sell abortions. People buy abortions from them. People pay for abortions.
And they buy contraception. I don't know that we use that term very much in medical.
Right, I know, whatever. But there's an exchange of money happening at that level. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. The Hyde Amendment has passed for so many years. That seems to be, every year it's put up and every year it passes. So I'm not sure what to say about the prospects of H.R. 3. It seemed like a pretty, it does have these exceptions in there. It does have all these people who have co-signed onto it, and it does seem like with this huge new market for government involvement in this other part of healthcare, people are really going to be demanding more than the Obama executive order when it comes to making sure that abortion isn't funded. How that's all going to pan out, I have no idea. But
my feeling is it's probably not going to go anywhere. One of the reasons the Hyde Amendment is just so easy to pass is because of the same thing we were talking about with Gosnell's patients earlier. When you attack the underprivileged, no one cares in this country. Now, I think, this H.R. 3 is basically trying to expand that attack to make sure that women with private insurance that are much more likely to be middle-class women can't get abortion funding. The thing is, only something like 17% of abortions are paid for with insurance anyway at this point. Even women whose insurance covers it, they will often pay out of pocket because they don't want that to be on their medical or on their insurance record, which they're afraid is going to get, employers are going to look at it and think they're a dirty slut. And, if it was me, I'd probably be and I'm probably the exception. If I had to get an insurance-funded abortion, I probably wouldn't care because I think I'm on the record at this point with my feelings about abortion. But I can see why women would do that anyway. But the reason I think H.R. 3 is going to stall out is because it's nobody, the Senate is not interested. They can't get anything done. They're certainly not going to, waste time on a bill that Obama is probably just going to veto anyway, even if they passed it.
It is interesting because some of the pro-life Democrats are still in there and are potentially facing, elections coming up, which might make them more inclined to prove that despite passing Obamacare that they are, still on the side of pro-lifers or something. But I don't think it would be enough to make it pass there. But I'm not really sure.
Obama would veto it. He's pro-choice. He's just he only signed that executive order to basically because he was being blackmailed by Bart Stupak. He did not want to sign that.
What did Cecile Richards call it? She was not even that upset about it. She was like, this is symbolic. This is not something with teeth. Even the funding of abortion in those state-funded exchanges or in the state-run exchanges.
Well, the reason it was symbolic was it was already in the Healthcare Reform Act. The Stupak Amendment was already on the bill. Basically, the language of the executive order was the same.
If it were in there, why would you fight it? That doesn't make any sense. Why would you fight it tooth and nail if it were already in there?
I think it was just I was on the opinion, I was just get it done, I think a lot of people just fought it because they didn't understand that it was going to happen one way or another. And also, I think it's painful to see somebody who's been a stalwart pro-choice ally just sign something like that. It's gut-wrenching. But even that's politics.
When there was outcry over those state-run exchanges, including abortion, HHS did write a policy saying that would not be allowed, but they didn't argue that it was banned by the bill. They just wrote a new policy.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm confused.
Okay, remember that brouhaha? I remember Pennsylvania was one of the states that included abortion in the state-run exchanges.
Mm-hmm.
And people, pro-lifers, found out about it and they raised a ruckus. And HHS said, they wrote up a new policy saying you can't include abortion, you can't fund abortion in these state-run exchanges. But when they did that, they didn't argue that the healthcare bill banned such things or that the executive order banned such things. They just wrote up a new policy saying, you can't do that from here on out. Basically saying the spirit of that executive order means you should not do this.
Yeah, I imagine it was just a clarification. I don't imagine that it had much to do.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe we should talk about at least one thing that's not abortion related before we wrap this up.
Yes. So the Sarah Palin situation. You sent me an article from the Wall Street Journal that was basically accusing feminists of disliking Sarah Palin because of, what was it, womb envy?
That's what I paraphrased it as womb envy. I think it was written with a bit more nuance than that, saying that her fertility or fecundity is a direct threat to like the feminist arguments and how she's been this very successful.
She's so hot and sexy. Yeah.
Oh, and then also, yeah. So,
I liked that part because it made me dig around for my Sarah Palin glasses. Mm-hmm. I dressed like her for Halloween, and I was such a dead ringer for her that people were like, they couldn't even look at me. And I wanted to just do that as a sort of rebuttal to the notion that we just wish we looked like her, because some of us do.
Huh. Okay, wait. So the first year she was on the national scene was the first year that I took my oldest trick-or-treating, and everyone in my Capitol Hill neighborhood was dressed up as her. And there's something weird about that. I'm sorry. There's something weird about that. And also...
she's got a very common look. Bangs, brunette, narrow face.
And yet, Tracy Jordan is in trouble right now, or not in trouble is the more likely way of putting it, for what he said about Sarah Palin. Do you know where he said this? I was a little confused.
Yeah, I actually posted on it just before we called each other on Slate's Double X, and basically Tracy Morgan was being a guest commentator for TNT's Inside the NBA, I think the show is called, and the guys on that show were like yucking around. They're like, so Tina Fey or Sarah Palin? And Tracy Morgan, you could just see the gears turn in his head for a second, like the way comedians do, like, I'm going to turn this into a really inappropriate joke. And then he just said, Sarah Palin, she's like real masturbation material. I'm paraphrasing, but like, he's like, the glasses, totally masturbation material. And you could tell from the looks on these guys' faces that they were like, oh, we went there.
Well, let me first say that there's nothing better than watching those clips of Tracy Jordan visiting like small town media markets to discuss his projects, because he always appears like drunk and or crazy and just says unbelievably inappropriate things that you're not supposed to say on these morning, 5 a.m. shows.
I love him.
Like, doesn't that seem like he's let the cat slip out of the bar, so to speak? I mean, it does seem like there is a sexual component to the fear, loathing, hatred, unbelievable, crazy response to Sarah Palin. You might say your role playing as Sarah Palin does not have a sexual component, but I mean...
Oh, no, it totally does. Like, I put on the glasses and dressed like her for Halloween because it was funny, but also, somebody was like looked at me and was like said something very similar to Tracy Morgan. They're like, oh, it's hard to look at you like that because she's got that like kind of trashy like sexiness to her that is just really disconcerting, and like and you're not like that at all. So it was just sort of doubly disconcerting for them. But
I do have to admit, it's surprising to me the way feminists treat her. I mean, here's a woman who's the first female governor of the most male.
Well, I'm not speaking for feminists. I'm just making fun of her. Like, there's a
right, but she's the first female to be on the Republican presidential ballot. Mm-hmm. She is someone who has also managed to balance work with home life. She has 5 kids, which is something that a lot of women, in order to be successful in business, they limit the size of their families to smaller than that. number. It seems like this is something that should be applauded, and yet from the very moment she appeared on the national stage, every single one of her choices has been lambasted. I remember Sally Quinn's very first piece on it was like, how dare this woman with children think that she could have a real job, you know? She should be home barefoot in the kitchen. What a horrible person, you know? And this was like on TV that she was saying this. And
yeah, well, that's obviously offensive. And I mean, I don't have a problem with Sarah Palin having 5 children or being a governor or doing whatever she does. I just don't like her politics. Like,
okay, but there are a lot of people whose politics you don't like. What makes her the center of all rage? Like, she's not that distinguished in her views from many other Republican politicians. Why all the rage? Why all the anger? Why the investigations of her uterus, as Andrew Sullivan has been on like year 2 of Uterus Watch with Palin? I mean,
oh, I know, he's terrible. Like, he's terrible. Like leave it alone. Like, I think it's 2 things. Like, I think the number one reason she attracts so much attention is that she's a true believer. Like, we don't actually see many of those in the GOP. Yeah, they say the same things, but like, she's like a crazy Pentecostal, like speaking in tongues, like right-wing populist. She's for real. Like, she's not pandering to those people. She is those people. And I think that puts her so far out of the Beltway mainstream that she's become an object of fascination. I think she's funny. Like, I know I'm from Texas. I have known people like that my whole life. Like, but I think that's probably the main thing. And then, yeah, she's good looking, and I think a lot of it has to do with that. And I do think that part of the problem with John McCain picking her as the vice presidential candidate was obviously not vetting her at all. It was offensive to feminists, but I think part of it was because the implication was like any woman will do. Like, and we're like, no, some are qualified, some are not. Like, in the GOP, many are qualified. Like, what about someone like Kay Bailey Hutchinson? She's a good politician. She's real sharp, you know? If you wanted to put
a woman on the ballot. It would have been a horrible pick for John McCain. I mean, the fact of the matter is that was like the only good decision that John McCain probably made, because he was losing the entire race except for like 2 weeks after he picked her. And then he went back to losing. I mean, if he had picked Kay Bailey Hutchinson, who's an abortion rights supporter, his party would have completely abandoned him.
She's got like a 90% on the pro-life scale. Like,
trust me, she is not liked by pro-lifers. She is not. I mean, that was like the big concern with social conservatives and whatnot in the party anyway. And even actually economic conservatives, they all thought McCain was awful. So he needed someone to kind of shore that up. He's not going to get that with another senator. I mean, he had to pick a governor. He had to pick, you know, I don't know. I don't think it was really a bad decision at all. Of course, also the guy who won picked Joe Biden, my favorite goofy vice presidential guy ever. But I mean, it's not like, I mean, that was a joke too.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, Biden is a loudmouth and runs his mouth, but he's also knows what he's talking about, and that's like a huge difference between the two. I mean, Sarah Palin, she was on TV the other day saying some like crazy crap about Sputnik and the Soviets running themselves into the ground and saying that they won the space race and like all sorts of random stuff. And it's like every time she opens her mouth, just something stupid falls out. And like,
no, I mean, that you do realize we're talking about Joe Biden, who's like got the record for saying stupid things and has been on like the wrong side of every foreign policy decision of his entire career. But I don't know. My own view is that most politicians are full of crap, and I will never understand the obsession with Palin. I did also want to ask you about Bachmann real quick. Did you watch her Tea Party response?
Oh, yes. I went to a State of the Union watch party, and everyone was like, for drinking liberally here in Brooklyn, and everyone was kind of like, yay, Obama, woo, a little bit, but it was muted because it was not really our kind of speech. And then Paul Ryan was like, meh. But when Paul Ryan was done, the entire bar started to yell, Bachmann, Bachmann, Bachmann. It was hilarious. And she did not fail to deliver exactly what we at Drinking Liberally wanted to hear, which was just I actually was put in mind of Ross Perot in the 90s. I don't know. What did you think of it?
All right. I actually did not watch it, but I did think that the charts were a nice throwback to the Perot era. I believe in more charts. I really do. I think,
That was a particularly bad chart, though. She left entire years off of it.
Like, if you had bet money which person's going to bring out charts, Paul Ryan or Michelle Bachmann, you would have lost that bet, that night. So in fact, I would have liked charts with Obama's speech, too. Of course, I also think...
And they did actually have charts with his speech online. If you watch the State of the Union through whitehouse.gov, there was, the speech on one side, and then on the other side, it was rolling graphic charts that they had pre-planned. In fact, when he talked about salmon, they had the chart in a salmon shape.
Wow. Well, also, though, you're the person who thinks Bachmann's crazy because she doesn't like the regulations governing light bulbs. Is that right?
I found that, her obsession with that just amazing. President Bush signed that bill. Who cares? I'm looking at a fluorescent light right now. I object to the notion that they are ugly. I think I look very nice right now.
I want to say, I am not a very political person, and these light bulb rules make me want to, start a revolution. I cannot stand fluorescent lights, and I have, visual disorders, and I get migraines, so it's actually, a big problem for me, and I've started stockpiling regular, old school light bulbs, much to the... bulbs. Yeah, my husband's, insisting that there's no difference in the quality of the light, and but it really actually bothers me. So I just want to say, if Michelle Bachmann is going to change those rules, then I'm going to start working for her. No. Whoever is going to fight these rules, they've got my vote.
My electric bill was cut significantly when we switched to fluorescence. My home, we switched to fluorescence before it was the law because we were a bunch of greenies. And I really just think they're great. I used to hate them. I really did. Back in the day when they were gave this unappealing green glow to everything. Mm-hmm. But I think they're fine. This one, as you can see, viewers, when you're looking at it, I am staring right at a fluorescent light. It is a nice yellow color. So we'll just have to leave it to the viewer to decide. We can at least agree, I'm sure, no matter what our political differences, that those LED lights instead of real Christmas lights are the worst, right? Yes.
Okay, good.
So where do you fall on the whites versus colored lights on Christmas lights as well?
I do not have strong views on this. I'm reminded that I should probably be taking our Christmas decorations down from outside, which are still up. But, I don't. I'm all for whatever.
It's a subject of great debate in the feminist community. So.
Oh, in the which community?
The feminist community, white versus colored Christmas lights.
Are you being serious right now? Because I'm really not sure.
No, I'm joking.
Okay. I mean, I could imagine that being inaccurate, but
I'm just being silly. So I guess with white versus colored Christmas lights, we should probably end this discussion.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for taking this time, and wish you the best as you continue your work.
Thank you very much. Nice meeting you, Molly.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.